Part 1. The Neon Knight Begins. The Not-So-Dark Knight as an Element in Batman's Transmedia Multiverse. This part of the book is divided into 3 sections. The first of which is titled, Into the Batverse, From the Multiverse of Stories to the Multiverse of Readings. The cover of Detective Comics number 241 from March 1957 could have a regular Batman Stories reader seriously astonished. The drawing created by the artist involved in the issue, Sheldon Moldoff, was a rather peculiar depiction of the Dark Knight, wearing an aggressively red, almost pink in fact, bat costume and looking at a whole collection of other multicolored outfits, in shades of green, yellow, or orange. The cover itself invited a possibly stunned reader to a storyline entitled The Rainbow Batman, and announced by a brief dialogue between the pinkish knight and his faithful companion Robin. Quote, "But, Batman, last night you wore the green costume, and tonight you're wearing the red. Why?" asked Boy Wonder, and his companion responded. "I must, Robin. I must wear a different colored Batman costume each night." The story itself, written by Edmund Hamilton, represents a classic case of what one could call typical Batman text from the 1950s narrative vault, dominated by heartwarming depictions of Batman's fellowship with Robin and virtually sensation-free entertainment. Hamilton then introduces the Boy Wonder during his normal superhero duties, as he escapes from the scene of a robbery and ends up injuring himself. In the subsequent part of the story, the young acrobat continues his search for criminals accompanied by Batman, who begins to don increasingly brighter and colorful suits for his everyday patrols. In the conclusion to this quite bizarre Batman adventure, it is explained that the Dark Knight's strange new preference for a rainbow wardrobe stemmed from his concern for the boy's fate and the risk of Robin's alter ego, Dick Grayson, being recognized due to the child's visible injury. Although the story itself is not really interested in commenting on those new iterations of the Dark Knight, who successively becomes the Red Knight, Yellow Knight, Green Knight, or Orange Knight, nor does it seek to insinuate some possible changes in the standard depiction of the dark attributes, such as loneliness, grittiness, or aggressiveness. It is actually a compelling cognitive exercise in Batmanology to imagine how differently the Orange Knight could act and solve criminal cases without the staple broodiness evoked by the equally standard outfit of black and gray. The idea of asking for a pastel depiction of Batman in comics or any other media may seem like blasphemy to the majority of his fans, on a par with the demand to make a film about the deadly xenomorphs from the 1979 Ridley Scott horror classic that follows the pattern of a romantic comedy, instead of the unconditionally expected tale of gore and blood. One may ask, however, if the process of undarkening the Dark Knight, both visually and thematically, can really hurt the hero so deeply that he'll no longer be a relevant character. And it is not as if the conundrum has only just arisen. Over the decades since Batman's debut in 1939, there have been distinct movements or currents which challenged the generally accepted darkness of the Dark Knight due to changing political and social climates, the fluctuating interest of the readers and creators, and the necessity of reimagining Batman to match new ages and trends. The orthodox supporters of the one and only acceptable as well as the most original version of the truly Dark Knight may thus find it difficult to defend their position, as from the very beginning of Batman's existence in the comic book form, the period of time when the character actually remained in line with the stock image of a lone vigilante was in fact quite brief. Just a few months after Batman's first appearance, the shadowy hero gained his most iconic companion in the person of Robin, the Boy Wonder, created by Bob Kane, Bill Finger, and Jerry Robinson for Detective Comics number 38 of April 1940. Invoking Bob Kane himself, Will Brooker observes that, quote, "The introduction of Robin changed the entire tone of the Batman stories. Robin lightened up the mood of the strip, and he and Batman would engage in punning and badinage as they defeated their adversaries. The brightness of Robin's costume also served to brighten up the visuals and served as a counterpoint to Batman's somber costume. More significantly, the addition of Robin gave Batman a permanent relationship, someone to care for, and made him into a fatherly big brother rather than a lone avenger." End quote. In the 1940s wartime stories, and notably in the American Comics Code-regulated superhero narratives of the 1950s and 60s, Batman stories maintained a rather family-friendly tone and mellow graphics that differed so drastically from the widely presumed seriousness and ferocity that most Batman fans take for granted. It is genuinely interesting that even today such a departure from the gothic image of Batman, so typical of the aforementioned incarnation of the character in the golden and silver age of American comics, is still treated in the general discourse as a mistake rather than a possible variation of this fictional character. As a result, the otherwise quite informative video essay posted by YouTube channel Salazar Knight, dedicated to the continuing presence of Batman in comics, in which the author discusses the troubling decades of the 1950s and 1960s, was symptomatically titled Batman's Real Nemesis, the Silver Age, implying that the stories such as The Bizarre Batman Genie, written by Dave Wood and penciled by Sheldon Moldoff for Detective Comics number 322, cannot be treated as equally real or acceptable incarnations of Batman, given that the imagery of a violent Avenger and a wish-fulfilling caped crusader in a turban are too remote for each other to involve the same character. In his infamous line from an interview for Los Angeles Times, Grant Morrison, one of the principal architects of Batman's modern embodiment in comics, shared a critical formula which ensures permanence and attractiveness to a character that defies the passage of time. The interviewer observes, quote, "I'm fascinated by the flexibility of the character. Batman is such a cheery Saturday morning cartoon with the brave and the bold, but he's also beating people to a pulp in The Dark Knight, a film that pushed the limits of PG-13. He's a Fisher-Price toy for toddlers and a sociopath in Frank Miller's books. And nobody blinks." End quote. Morris replies thus, quote, "Supple is the word. It's really weird. Batman can take anything. You can do comedy Batman. You can do gay Batman. It all works. It's something intrinsic to the character. It's so strange and amazing." End quote. Morrison offers a plain and simple explanation of a very popular characteristic that became almost an indisputable mantra for many Batman scholars and researchers. The key thing here is the idea that a single fictional character is able to accommodate as many different interpretations and incarnations as possible, in response to a wide range of audiences and demographic groups which may be interested in drastically different aspects of the same figure. The concept was successfully tested in Batman studies by scholars such as Roberta E. Pearson, William Erdicchio, or Will Brooker, in their applications of the floating signifier category, derived from Tony Bennett and Janet Woolacott's study of James Bond's similar capacity to adapt to the ever-changing needs and demands of the readers or creators. Although there is nothing new in examining fictional characters like Bond or Batman through an analytical effort to identify the so-called moments of Bond or moments of Batman, i.e. every single and particular use of the character in a specified context of time, politics, and culture, one cannot fail to emphasize the acceptance factor affecting certain moments of Batman, or their validity for particular groups of users of the character. In other words, as promising as the floating signifier happens to be in superhero study involving Batman and similar figures, it should presume one vital objective, namely account for the aforementioned approval for specific variations and the volatile nature of recognizing certain iterations as accurate, or at least tolerable. The floating nature of Batman, construed as a never-ending migration across media, artistic patterns, readers' demographics, and political contexts, turns out to be a fundamentally important matter for all cultural researchers interested in tracing how individual forms of culture are consumed, while others are rejected and negotiated. After all, the issue lies at the root of 20th century cultural studies, shaped by the University of Birmingham's Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies in the 1960s with its major figures of Stuart Hall, Angela McRobbie, Paul Williams, David Morley, and John Fiske. The problems previously explored to understand how British viewers actually comprehended the encoded messages they consumed through television broadcast may still resurface in modern inquiry into accepting or rejecting contemporary media messages, which can also involve the colorful characters of superheroes. With the rise of social media and the growing openness to multiple competitive readings of every single fictional or non-fictional product, character, and service, it has become even more vital to be aware of the diversified notions that may be pushed by various factions of social actors in favor or against the existing preferred version of a particular phenomenon. This has been very aptly observed by Jennifer Dondero in an essay on modern online fan communities dedicated to the Batman persona, and the strategies of hijacking official stills or images to make personalized memes and GIFs, which articulate the dominant or counter-dominant interpretations of the Dark Knight's basic attributes. Dondero adopts a very interesting perspective on comparative research between the canonical substance, sustained by the official Batman-related material and subconsciously shared by the general audience, and subjectified headcanons formulated by individual users through all types of independent releases which can adhere to or negotiate with the more universal understanding of the character. The essential element here is that according to Dondero's analysis, the vast majority of bottom-to-top generated representations endorse the classic Dark Knight's appearance, even by amplifying Batman's commonly known brutality or phenomenal intelligence to a truly superhuman and absurd level. Dondero explains, quote, "One of the many memes that highlight this particular aspect of Batman's character is a macro image of a panel from World's Finest number 153, November 1965. The image is Batman slapping Robin, and the original text has been replaced with Robin starting to ask Batman what he got his parents for Christmas, and Batman yelling, 'My parents are dead!' While this meme certainly pokes fun at the art of older comics and Batman's ever-present angst over his parents' murder, it is also a sign that Batman fans recognize that Batman is motivated by understandable human grief. Canonical material and fans like to revisit the idea of Batman as a hero with a tragic past because it is a human motivation we can all recognize. The fact that Batman perpetually grieves for his family is especially poignant in light of how stoic and detached he forces himself to be, in order to be a hero. Consequently, Batman allows himself to be dark, mistrustful, cold, and sometimes highly immoral with regard to his personal relationships. Essentially, he sacrifices the things that make him human so he can be more than human as Batman. This resonates more with fandom than a hero motivated by his own intrinsic goodness." End quote. Despite his floating abilities and a possible range of adaptation skills to suit many different uses or visions, the Batman character appears to be strongly hunkered in this one single model which seems to eclipse all more unconventional versions. His graphic and thematic incarnations can indeed recycle any genre-dependent patterns or artistic styles, situating Batman in the Victorian Age, a Wild West adventure, space exploration alongside his Justice League companions, or future cyberpunk-like exploits. Yet all these variants are expected to respect the apparently one and only true understanding of Batman as the Dark Knight, both visually and psychologically. As Jeffrey A. Brown rightly notes, Batman constitutes a cultural nexus, a figure that can integrate many competitive readings, which span children's TV series in Batman the Brave and the Bold, and the psychopathic Zack Snyder's vision in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. However, it is tacitly understood that one major iteration represents possibly the most accurate depiction of the character. According to Brown, quote, "The enduring popularity of The Dark Knight Returns has made it a type of de facto Bible for understanding the character. The Dark Knight Returns is still ranked as the best Batman story ever in hundreds of online lists. Moreover, the brooding and resolute persona that Frank Miller solidified for Batman in the mid-1980s remains at the core of the character in most modern depictions. Variations of Batman continue to emerge and find expression, but these alternative Batman always remain on the margins of canonicity." End quote. A question arises at this point. What about all those marginal Batmen and Batwomen out there who seek their expression of Batman beyond the 1986 canonized interpretations by Frank Miller? What about all the knights that want to avoid the dark element, or at least aspire to broaden its shared meaning with features or qualities that are uncommon for the traditional Dark Knight, both in terms of his appearance and behavior? Is it even feasible to remain the Dark Knight outside the darkness element, or, to draw on Jeffrey A. Brown once more, outside the widely espoused Batman Prime embodiment? Is there a textual and cultural place for an Orange Knight and his colorful companions and followers? The faithful adherents of the canonical Batman concept would argue that the appellation, the Dark Knight, is there for a reason, and the very idea of erasing certain essential qualities of Batman, like the externally and internally projected broodiness or roughness, can simply lead to the erosion of the character itself, resulting in such drastic changes that they may basically undermine the very core of this hero. Still, the real question is whether the multi-level darkness component really translates into the independence and attractiveness of Batman as a fictional character, and how much damage would really be caused by imbuing that dark representation with somewhat brighter elements. Here, one could refer to the most essential and fundamental characterization of the Batman persona by Jim Beard, summarized as follows. Number 1. Batman is Bruce Wayne. Number 2. Bruce Wayne's parents were murdered when he was a boy, inspiring him to become a crime fighter. Number 3. Bruce Wayne dresses in a bat costume and calls himself Batman to fight crime. Number 4. Batman's mental and physical powers are at the peak of human capability. Number 5. Batman is an inventor who has created many devices and vehicles to aid him in his crime fighting. In this particular list, the darkness or grittiness characteristic is conspicuously missing. In other words, one may assume that some factors are even more critical to defining the Batman character than the qualities denoted by the dark attribute, whereas removing them still leaves numerous narrative and/or conceptual building blocks to recognize Batman even outside the influential thematic shadow of Dark Knight Returns. Batman's fluid essence once again inspires diversified optics, as one can cite other substantial conceptualizations of the Dark Knight in which the dark element plays a much more significant role than in Beard's list. This is the case in the greatly influential approach developed by Roberta E. Pearson and William Urruccio in their watershed publication in Batman Studies, where both authors also attempted to define the core idea that makes Batman the character he is. Quote, "His name was the Batman, a dark, mysterious character of the night, stalking the streets, defying criminals with intelligence, athletic powers, and state-of-the-art gadgetry, terrifying enemies who dare cross his path. The Batman had a secret identity, that of Bruce Wayne, wealthy playboy. At a very young age, his parents were killed in the streets of Gotham." End quote. By accentuating the role of night-stalking or terrifying criminals, Pearson and Urruccio certainly draw on the Dark Knight's most canonical understanding, which nonetheless may be more of a cultural variant than a stable and indisputable paradigm since, as already noted, there are even more essential depictions of Batman's defining attributes without the dark component. Moreover, shortly after his graphic debut, the hero created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger gravitated towards less dark narrative patterns. Therefore, one could argue theoretically that the Dark Knight Returns depiction is the anomaly, rather than the bright and happy Silver Age Crusader. It all whittles down to earlier Will Brooker's conclusion that the fictional Batman figure requires a specifically cultural approach to the very idea of authorship, both in the official products and individual interpretations alike, since the effort to formulate the conclusive and definitive understanding of this hero actually reflects users' own taste, expectations, and experiences of a character instead of bringing out inalienable elements of this fictional creation. The issue is also highlighted by Alex S. Romanoli and Gian S. Pagnucci. Quote, "What every superhero has is a collection of media over a given number of years that defines who that character is in the socio-cultural context. Some heroes have more prominence than others, of course, but the variation in representation of these characters is what constitutes a canon of superhero literature. It is impossible, however, to include any and all representations of one superhero and claim that one superhero represents the entire canon of superhero literature. Bloom's aesthetic value encompasses that which seems most important when reading literature and/or texts of any kind, whether the story sticks with us." End quote. Once again, the ultimate explanation for the dominance of a given depiction of Batman, namely the Dark Knight, should be considered a strictly cultural as opposed to aesthetic matter in view of its high degree of self-reflexivity and the evidently floating aspect of the character itself, with its unstable set of defining characteristics or connotations. This is even more important than asking about the premise behind canonizing the Dark Knight and marginalizing the rainbow incarnations of Batman, which after all offer a genuinely broad range of possible social or political uses of this hero. As Kevin K. Durand observes in his essay about the hybrid nature of Batman's long-standing presence, the quest to define Batman Prime or the dominant Batman interpretation is ineffective, since it tries to come up with carved-in-stone explanations and impose a hierarchical framework within an organically unstable phenomenon which, as noted earlier, forges its substantial incarnations in response to highly subjective experiences and expectations pinned on the character. All these efforts to designate a selected Batman Prime and then assess all the other variants relative to this core idea merely confine the analytical possibilities within Batman's studies as well as produce unfair assumptions that lead to social conflicts consisting in "my Batman is better than yours" arguments. According to Durand, the crux lies in the very nature of the so-called superhero canon and the manner in which it should be understood by fans and scholars alike to fully embrace the floating capacity of characters like Batman. Instead of the traditional postulation that traits in a fictional canon are supplied by the official texts, nurtured by creators, as well as safeguarded by curator-like fans who protect its stability and completeness, it may be much more efficient, Durand explains, to alter the notion of a canon's nature toward a much more inclusive and culture-conscious modality called a hybrid canon, which transcends the restrictive terms of the official and non-canonical uses. Durand suggests, quote, "With respect to the question of canonical authority, the strength and weakness of any hybrid canon is that no particular instance can claim with much authority that status of authority. This is particularly true with Batman. The canon is so diverse that no particular franchise can claim canonical primacy, while, at the same time, the major moments of which there are many, can all lay claim to primacy. Thus, for these reasons, we must answer the opening question of this essay with a resounding, no, there isn't a definitive Batman. There are, in fact, several." End quote. Durand's proposal once again may seem a virtually destructive assumption for the majority of comic book fandom and superhero readers, who have already grown accustomed to the necessity of controlling and gatekeeping the canon in its essence as a sacred timeline of narrative which encompasses the right versions of heroes and events. Still, it would be interesting to apply Durand's perspective to yet another fundamental term for comic book stories, namely fictional multiverse, which should consistently be approached from the standpoint of cultural acts instead of strictly diegetic patterns. As Andrew Friedenthal explains comprehensively in his study concerning the DC multiverse structure, quote, "Though the DC multiverse primarily exists as a setting for narratives, it also exists as a kind of map of the entire imaginary world of DC Comics. By allowing for multiplicity, the multiverse gives creators the ability to continually flesh out the details of this infinitely expansive imaginary world, creating a massive structure within which endless narrative permutations can take place. It aids the writers, artists, editors, and other creators in maintaining invention, completeness, and consistency. In regard to invention, the multiverse provides the opportunities for creators to chart and explore worlds that differ from our own in ways that the main DC universe, designed to simulate the world outside our windows, does not, save for the existence of superheroes, magic, aliens, and the like." End quote. As a narrative structure, multiverse is an excuse to effect counterfactual and counter-diegetic revisions of certain characters or events within the controlled mainframe of fictional universes of DC or Marvel comics, construed as a self-contained and interconnected set of stories. In Karin Kukkonen's study, this counterstructure of superhero multiverses triggers interesting options as the multiverse structure can initiate variantization of any given narrative model and, consequently, be an exercise in launching alternative mental models for readers to comprehend and integrate within broader understandings of a specific story world. One may thus assume that the very existence of a multiverse paradigm is a much welcome opportunity for making the traditionally gate-kept superhero patterns, like the Dark Knight standard, more inclusive and aesthetically malleable, due to the growing potential of envisioning a counter-canonical version of Batman who abandons his Dark Knight roots and transitions towards a lightened appearance. This is the inherent promise of creating a multiverse, finally encompassing a possibly infinite number of readings that align with the expectations of a hybrid canon, and demanding a higher degree of revised and personified uses of floating signifiers embodied in superheroes. William Proctor construes multiverse in line with the concept of forking paths, which was conceived by Jorge Luis Borges, as this layout symbolically describes the notion of multiverse in physics, where quantum mechanics is represented by the eponymous garden of forking paths. Quote, "A spatio-temporal labyrinth comprising an infinite series of times, in a growing, dizzying network of divergent, convergent, and parallel times." End quote. For this study, however, the real concern is how radically revisionist these competitive paths can really be, with the massive conceptual neutron star of Dark Knight looming within the multiverse of Batman-related texts and readings. As Terence R. Wanke explains, the logic of revisionism is crucial for superhero readings and readers since, as the author himself notes with respect to Batman, the artistic and economic continuity of the long-lived Caped Crusaders stories in a transmedia environment is shaped by the constant sine wave of competitive understandings of the character, going from one extreme to the other and crossing through multiple intermediate stages in between. This clarifies the cultural and aesthetical aspect of the multiversal model since its very essence is a promise of eliciting as many possible variants and variations as possible. In this case, catering to the enthusiast of the grim Dark Knight and a more optimistic, rainbow-themed Crusader alike. Outside the strict limitations of the main single timeline or a stock franchise idea, the multiverse offers an opportunity to truly embrace probably the most valid quality of superhero narratives, their neo-oral specificity, a direct upshot of the openness of classical oral culture to radical modifications within the mainframe of a story, due to the changing nature of the storytellers and listeners. In Retcon Game, Retroactive Continuity and the Hyperlinking of America, Andrew J. Friedenthal highlights the fact that modern culture's thoroughly transmedia mode of producing and consuming any given popular story, via diverse media channels, electronic devices, and online communities, actually sustains this mature form of the second oral culture, which derives from Walter Ong's original concept of primary and secondary orality, where the former reflects the manner of participating in the storytelling process in traditional cultures as a dialogue between the audience and the content of a story itself. The key factor here is the acquiescence to all the necessary repetitions and corrections within the narrative that should be permitted due to the evolving nature of that cultural act, including the shifts in social awareness, historical context, or just simply individual expectations towards a presented fiction. Drawing on the classic insight of Umberto Eco, the trick with superheroes as present-day instances of the oral tradition is to discern this continuing tension between their stable attributes and the much more flexible narrative elements, which can and should be susceptible to a shifting set of qualities that a specific costumed character is supposed to manifest in the eyes of the equally variable array of their actual users. The idealistic model of multiversal structure and its properties of a fully inclusive and tolerant paradigm is one thing. The actual application of such a strategy is another, especially as it entails much more complicated negotiations between the acceptable or unacceptable readings or the already mentioned marginalization, since certain forking paths are relegated to the narrative fringe. This is prominent in the Batman phenomenon and its enduring reliance on the Dark Knight-centered appearance, which seems resistant to any attempts to lighten up the hero and immediately dismisses such efforts as unofficial or uncanonical readings. This is the case with the famous Batman TV series made for the ABC network in 1966, inclusive of its iconic campy costume, which, as Richard Reynolds observes in his analysis, was, quote, never intended to form part of the overall Batman-DC continuity, and fans have no problem separating these texts from the structure of continuity and enjoying them in isolation from the canonical works, end quote. The key thing, however, is once again to discern this enduring notion that the not-so-Dark Knight is a travesty, or at least a distant outlier with respect to the core portrayal of the thoroughly Dark Knight, which does not admit any radical changes in tone or form. Alternatively, the undarkened variants are acceptable in the mainstream as long as they enrich the visual patterns but do not affect thematic interpretation since, as Drew Morton argues, quote, fans appear to have accepted stylization as an alternative to verisimilitude. However, the limit of the acceptance amongst fans ends where style takes on the negative connotations of camp. End quote. Again, the problem here lies in the strictly hierarchical notion about the true representation of Batman and its secondary readings, which actually goes against the multiversal nature of superhero stories, in which competitive renditions are equally significant in cultural terms. The core Batman can never become an Orange Knight. The essential Batman should never demonstrate a more optimistic approach. He is constantly resistant to the happy, trauma-free, and undarkened persona. Such variations are to be found in the deliberately child-friendly products and media content such as the recent Batman, the Brave and the Bold animated show on Cartoon Network, or the Lego Batman iteration. The very form and appearance of the minifigure automatically encourages a more permissive approach. Still, is it really such an outrage to embrace other iterations as the core reading of Batman? Are the available Rainbow Batman really unable to add to the character's features, so that it may become the multicultural and multi-aesthetic floating signifier which so many scholars and readers are looking for? Today, one readily observes an ongoing race to have the multiverse agenda implemented ubiquitously in corporate products and services, especially those whose franchises and trademarks originate directly from comic book sources. However, the application of the multiverse concept appears quite shallow, being nothing more than a slightly broader classic universe approach, involving an interconnected strategy of combining distinct movie comic book series and groups of characters. As yet, the actual ability of the multiverse to delineate separate paths of readings for specific characters is not manifest. The point is not to diversify Batman or Doctor Strange by changing the actors or their garish outfits, but to situate them in a completely different set of narratives, since many uses of these heroes can be seen as an admissions ticket set in different visual settings, bringing distinct aspects of the characters to the foray. After all, it is not the pre-projected depressive tone or psychological darkness that truly makes Batman a timeless phenomenon. This idée fixe could and should be regularly challenged by new and fresh visual and thematic colors. If secondary orality is indeed applicable in superhero analysis, then it should embrace its most fundamental cultural quality, which Terence R. Wandke identifies after Walter Ong as the triangulation of the additive, aggregative, and redundant features that have an impact on this phenomenon. Ultimately, it all leads to a fundamental observation concerning the status of superheroes and their analysis as multiversal characters. Their cores or definitive characteristics cannot be decided by way of hierarchical or apparently objective canonical readings, but rather construed as an amalgam of individual experiences, understandings, and expectations towards such figures, which indeed result in certain readings being canonized or decanonized in an evolving structure of social and political agendas. Nicholas Pumphrey observes that, quote, the reader influences the canon and continuity as much as the canon and continuity influences the reader, end quote. Hence, this study should ask why the Orange, Camp, or finally Neon Knight, as competitive readings of the Batman mythos, exist on the margins of the core Dark Knight personification, and why it would be productive in terms of knowledge to bring them out of analytical obscurity. In a very informative video essay about Joel Schumacher's Batman movies, popular YouTube film reviewer and analyst Patrick H. Willems prefaces his sincere homage to the Schumacher era with an interesting observation. Quote, I'm at San Diego Comic-Con, the nerd mecca of the West. I'm surrounded by an endless, overwhelming display of fandom, and what you'll see more than almost anything else here is Batman. Countless versions of Batman. Comic book Batman, Michael Keaton Batman, Ben Affleck Batman, and Adam West Batman. And the Batman who laughs, and Batman Beyond, Lego Batman. But there's one Batman you never seem to see, that many people would rather forget. End quote. Naturally, the repressed Batman is Schumacher's, a Batman demoted to a periphery even more distant than those inhabited by the campy Knight from the 60s or the Lego Batman, condescendingly regarded as a children's-only character. It would be fair to assume that he is the most outrageously wrong and unwanted Batman, the most direct and vivid opposite to the central Dark Knight, which in fact should not even be considered admissible within the open multiverse structure. Willems underlines that there is generally no interest in imitating this incarnation, even amongst the most Batman-fixated cosplayers. Which qualities, then, make this particular vision the worst of all Batman? How far did Schumacher go in his misunderstanding of who Batman is and how the character should act? Interestingly enough, even during the early showings of Schumacher's first Batman Forever, there were many voices that identified that particular vision as misguided within the acceptable scope of Batman's interpretation. Andrew Goldman, a journalist for the entertainment news site Vulture, recalled Batman Forever's premiere in an in-depth interview with Joel Schumacher, openly admitting, quote, "Charlie Rose had a whole segment on Batman Forever, the Monday in 1995 after it had the highest grossing opening weekend in history, with $52.8 million in 3-day grosses. Batman Forever unseated previous record holder Jurassic Park with $47 million. Those films now hold the number 217 and number 261 spots, respectively, on the list. 2019's Avengers Endgame is currently on top with $357 million. David Denby from New York, Janet Maslin from The Times, and Stephen Schiff from The New Yorker all talked about how bad it was as a film, and for cinema in general. Maslin did concede that her children, 6 and 9 years old, enjoyed Batman Forever, and Denby remarked, "My 12-year-old son loved it and has seen it twice. He thought it was awesome, and we got into a terrible fight. Denby said he thought it was disgraceful." End quote. Considering the earlier discussion about the conservative nature of Batman's canon and the absence of a genuinely multiversal approach in evaluating all possible readings of the character, Joel Schumacher's Knight and his perception over the years is perhaps the most fascinating, as it is spurned by the fans of Adam West and Michael Keaton in their choices of Comic-Con costumes on the one hand, but on the other sees a growing range of Forever-based merchandise, as referred to in the introduction of this book. Within the hierarchical structure that the Batman-centric transmedia multiverse happens to have, one may assume that the Schumacher-directed Neon Knight would rank in the inferior regions, just below other unconventional Dark Knight readings like the Camp Knight, Lego's Cute Knight, or the quite numerous crowd of the Bright Knights that have inhabited many media over the decades, like the Sunny Knight conceived by Roberta E. Pearson and William Uricchio to describe the Batman fiction in the post-war and Comics Code-regulated DC magazines of the 1950s. The Neon Knight concept rises from that specific line of the lighter Batmen, with all the inevitable connotations that the Bright Knights generated over the years, including their most pivotal tendency to a sunnier Batman, identified as not just sunny, but positively gay. Before moving on to a description of the Neon Knight's features, it may be necessary to delve into this long lineup of pre-Neon Knights, who shared and pursued essentially the same aim of removing the stripped conceptual and graphic darkness from the Dark Knight. It would be interesting as well to see whether this undarkening process destroys Batman as a predefined figure or perhaps uncovers some non-traditional facets of the character's significance and socio-political usefulness. In keeping with this section's principal premise, i.e. the indispensable recognition of Batman's multiversal aspect as a tool of exploring the cosmos of Rainbow Knights which epitomize many parallel readings, it is time to examine a number of such instances as outcomes of campfire-like narratives, which may demonstrate some advantages over the most airtight depiction of the darkish Dark Knight. Dear God.